Hello and welcome to the Stiles Council. My name's David Hartrick and I am incredibly apologetic for the delay. It's not been down to Chris, it has all been down to me. My internet has been all over the place for the last 6 weeks. I'm not going to blame a specific internet provider because they haven't got a right to reply here, so I don't think that's particularly fair. But I will introduce Chris with a supplementary question. Chris, Richard Branson's an idiot, isn't he?
Well, if we're going to go that broad on their issues, yes, he is. Hello, it's been ages, and we've kind of just about got the World Cup out of the way, and then the new season's been a bit of a slow starter for us.
Yeah, I mean, again, to be serious for a moment, I have had a fairly terrible time internet-wise, so it's been a bit of a nightmare. It's no secret that me and Chris also do the Football Fives podcast, and it's been partly my fault that we haven't been able to record that as well. But I am now back up and running, so all good. We have actual football to talk about, Chris.
Yeah, straight in. We had a show lined up where we were going to talk about the winners and losers of the transfer window.
We did.
I think we can probably still come back to that at some point, but it's nice to be able to come straight in with, are we calling it competitive football?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have struggled to sort of work out how the Nation Leagues work, but I think if you just sort of go back and think about everything you've watched over the last couple of days and remember that Bruce Willis was a ghost all along, you should be able to understand it fairly simply, shouldn't you, Chris?
Yeah, it's complicated in a few ways, but once you do the research and have a read around it, it's relatively simple to understand. I think for most people, probably myself included, seeing it in action is going to help. Seeing it have that one roll through all the fixtures and seeing what happens at the end of it, depending on where you finish in your group, that's going to clear it up, I think.
As bad as it sort of sounds to say off the cup, but the simple truth is, if you're in that top league, as England are at the moment, so the top 4 divisions, what the Nations League does mean is it is almost nigh on impossible not to qualify for the next Euros.
There is that, yeah.
Yeah.
Its effect on the Euros is where I think it's going to be wait and see. Because what it does is, along with the number of teams that qualify for the Euros, it makes it very difficult for a lot of teams, frankly, to not qualify. But the Nations League in itself is, I won't call it simple, but I think once you see it, you'll get it.
Yeah. And I've seen quite a few people, as it sort of start saying, well, it is actually quite important because it could reflect upon your World Cup qualification. I think experience tells us, if you honestly think that FIFA are going to pay any mind to a competition that is completely devised by UEFA, I think you're very, very wrong. And I would almost suggest that we'll probably see FIFA go in the complete opposite direction if history tells us anything. But anyway, I want to get into the game because there's lots to discuss. But before we get into the sort of real specifics, Chris, one of the things I wanted to say right from the outset was that this is a game that, for me, really couldn't have reverted any more to type, in that England aren't as good as Spain. Spain keep the ball very well for long periods, but England are a team who are on the up and will play in spells at the moment. And there are things to be positive about whilst knowing where our weaknesses are. So I sort of feel it didn't really tell us anything we didn't know before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, Chris.
No, it didn't. I think Gareth Southgate's been very clear that he feels that Spain were on top for large portions of that game, and they were. I'm not surprised by that. I think it's, had we not come up against Belgium and Croatia, it might have been more of a shock what happened on Saturday night. But I think we are in a position with England now where we know that when it comes to punching up a significant distance at the very best teams, we haven't quite got it. And that was in evidence against Spain. And it felt very much like the Belgium games. It felt very much like the Croatia game, where there were real positives for England. I really do think there are some players in the England side this weekend that belong on that pitch. But I think there's a large area of the pitch where when you come up against a very, very good midfield, you can see where we're lagging behind.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying, Chris, to be honest with you, that Croatia have got an excellent midfield. That's where their strength is. Belgium have got an excellent midfield, and although the options ahead of them are perhaps even better, they have got a brilliant midfield. Spain have got an absolutely excellent midfield. We haven't, but we do know that. It's not as if we're, it's not as if we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here and going absolutely mental about it. We know where our strengths lie, and I don't think there's anything to get particularly down about before we get, as I said, before we get into the specifics about it. I certainly didn't watch that game on Saturday night and come out of it thinking, anything other than, well, fair enough, that's a pretty fair reflection of exactly where we are.
Yeah, they didn't let us down in any way that wasn't expected. I think knowing where we have weaknesses is good for all of us. And it is frustrating to know them going into a game and to see them play out quite so plainly as they were against Spain. But that's where we are. We know that we need to improve that midfield area.
Yeah, and Spain were perhaps, in a lot of ways, perhaps the single worst team we could have faced to have those weaknesses laid bare, weren't they?
When you look at the players they have in the midfield to control a midfield.
Yeah, and when you consider that they have, they have Sergio Ramos, who is, not only do they have all the options they have in midfield, they have Sergio Ramos, who almost plays as 0.5 of a midfielder as well. It as I said, it doesn't really tell us anything we didn't know. But anyway, Chris, goalkeeper Jordan Pickford gets picked. We're both absolutely on board with that, aren't we?
100%.
He is our number one going forward, and there's no real reason to change that at the moment, is there? There's no... And to be perfectly honest with you, as much as it pains me to see it, and as somebody who has already done a couple of Burnley games this season, there's no competition in the Premier League for Pickford as it stands, is there?
No, there really isn't. I think Butland is a significant competition. And I think he's the second of those two keepers.
Yeah.
In the Premier League, there's nothing.
I can tell you now as well, I've done a couple of Jack Butland's games this season in my day job, and he's not finding life particularly easy in the Championship. So, Jordan has that position for the foreseeable. So, Gomez, Stones and Maguire as your back three, Chris. Honest thoughts on that?
I think it was fairly obvious. Like the change there from the World Cup lineup is Kyle Walker. Joe Gomez has earned his opportunity in this. Whether we call it competitive or not, there have to be a few little tweaks here and there to see what you've got. And Gomez, as an informed player in a very good side, and actually you could argue as the man who had the shirt when he got injured, was, I think, a shoo-in for this game. Absolutely right to pick him.
Yeah, this game was a slight reinforcement of how far Gary Cahill is away currently, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think Cahill's decision reflects his awareness of that situation.
Yeah,
because
I do too.
When you've got three positions there, and Cahill can't play all three of them, but essentially you've got three centre-backs. And, just in the first 12 numbers on the squad list, you've got 4. And he's not close to being in a position to knock any of them out of the side at his age. I think he's done the right thing.
And you look at Tarkowski, who hasn't had a run in an England shirt yet and maybe won't get a run in the foreseeable, but he is certainly a very competent central defender who is playing week in, week out for his club side, isn't he?
Yeah, obvious, really.
Yeah. So I don't think either of us have any sort of complaint there. Trippier and Shaw, either side. I think Trippier is an absolute lock after the World Cup. There's with the greatest will in the world, there's almost no point discussing it. But
Kyle Walker's the discussion rather than someone who was competing with him at the World Cup. Because when you bring Gomez back in, Walker's got those two positions he can go into. Now, I think on current form for England, Trippier is absolutely the pick that you make. Yeah, but Walker's in the conversation.
He is in the conversation, Chris. But I think it's the Podolski rule, isn't it? When you've got somebody who looks so comfortable in an international shirt, then you keep playing them there for as long as you humanly can, don't you? But Shaw is the interesting one on the other side. He's had a very up and down time with Jose Mourinho. He's been a bit of a meme footballer for a couple of years. Everybody knows the rumours about his weight, etc. This season he started extremely well. I am a very big fan of Luke Shaw. I think he's a very, very good player. The thing about Luke Shaw is that left-footed on the left side is a very different prospect, isn't it, for England? And I don't think he's perfect defensively, but he does give you a lot going forward, doesn't he?
Yeah, he really does. I feel like I've kind of forgotten what Luke Shaw's all about over the last few years, because it was a terrible injury that he picked up. And his bits and pieces that he's played so far, I've seen a lot more of him in that period than I had just prior to his injury even. So it's been good to see what the fuss was about originally, you know. And that first game that they played against Leicester, scored the goal, but he was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it is that rampaging specialist wing back that really makes that difference and gives that balance for England as well. Because, you know, a fullback in the modern era switching to a wing back role is a lot easier than it used to be.
Yeah.
And the defensive lapses are a product of that, really. And
I know we're slightly jumping around all over the place here, but that was some ball for Rashford, wasn't it?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
What he does with that ball is he picks the ball out, but he almost takes the pace off it.
Yep.
So that it almost becomes like, the only thing I can sort of equate it to is in cricket where you bowl the slow one and you sort of catch the two defenders out by just dropping it perfectly in line rather than expecting your attacker to make that extra couple of feet to run onto it.
He putted it.
Yeah. That's exactly it, yeah. And I know, again, as I said, I'm well aware here we're jumping around all over the place. I know you can criticise him for the first goal because he comes up and he takes a high position, but I think if you're going to play the three at the back, I think you have to expect your wing-backs to take risks, and I'd far rather focus on the value of them going forward, Chris, if I'm honest. And I don't think that's just England tinted spectacles. I think if you're going to commit to the system, that's what you have to do, isn't it?
It's a system where I think our mate Daniel Story has pointed out that the wing-backs are, in effect, our primary creators. And the system is built around them doing that, and that is why we have three centre-backs. And I think the fault that he has for the first goal, for me, is less a positioning one, because, as you say, he's going to be higher up the field than you might expect a fullback to be. It was a technical one. It was just an error.
Midfield, we've got
next.
We've got Henderson, Lingard, and Ali here, who are our sort of nominal midfield three. I think the thing about England's formation is it's actually quite difficult to definitively classify positions at the moment. But that's our sort of nominal midfield three. My feelings about Henderson haven't really changed in that he is... I have had a bit of grief about this in the past, but I maintain, Chris, he is the single most average footballer I've ever seen. You know, and I'll say it again, he doesn't have a particularly weak part of his game, but he doesn't have a strong part. He's literally just a midfielder. That's what he does. That's what he comes to do. That's what he goes home doing. And I thought against Spain and a high quality midfield, I wouldn't say he got found out, but I would say that was perhaps in evidence more than against some other sides in the past.
He was isolated. I thought it was a very Jordan Henderson performance. I think I've seen him play good games for Liverpool. I have seen him play well for England as well, and I don't think he was helped out by the system against Spain at all. Because what he isn't is a commanding, sitting midfielder who's going to take on two Spanish players and
he's not a
really give
quarterback,
them
is he?
a tough game.
No, he's not a quarterback who's going to sit in front of that three, make life very, very difficult before you get to them, and then ping balls all over the place. That's not his game, is it?
And what he doesn't have around him is specialists. I have a lot of time for Jesse Lingard. He's not a specialist central midfielder. Does a great job for England. I thought he played very well last night, but he's not going to help Jordan Henderson out against Spain.
Yeah.
And Dele Alli is so shackled in this system, it's not true.
Yeah. This is what I want to get onto, really. I think Lingard played absolutely fine last night. He didn't do anything absolutely brilliant. He didn't do anything that was horrendously bad. He just put in a 6, 7 out of 10 performance, didn't he? And that's absolutely fine. Ali is the point where I think we start to look and think, well, we've got a bit of a problem because this system just does not get the best out of him at all, does it?
Out of him or his relationship with Harry Kane?
No. And last night, I think against real sort of quality opposition, it's Dele Alli who is the one that you look at and go, yeah, he's way out of bed here. He's the one who looks like it's not happening. And the thing is, it's easy to say that, but at the same time, it doesn't suit him, does it? I wouldn't say he wants to play the Paul Scholes role, but he wants the freedom to support Kane and get up and almost play as effectively a second striker.
Yeah.
He's not going to get that in this system, is he?
No, unless you push him into the position that Marcus Rashford played, which I don't think is his best position either.
No.
It's difficult with Ali because I'm certain he's a top quality player. It just feels like such a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah, I was talking. I come from a family full of Spurs fans, and we were having this conversation before the England game, actually, about when was the last time he'd put two quality performances together. And from a couple of Spurs fans, and I mean they are dyed in the wool Spurs fans as well, they reckon it was 2 years since he's put two really good performances back to back. And, you know, as somebody who doesn't follow him every single week, that feels about right as well, which is the bad thing, isn't it?
He's picked his time as well, hasn't he? Because he's, position-wise, he's vulnerable in this score. Because if we've got anything coming through, it's number 11s.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say the words Ruben Loftus-Cheek.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's just players who are knocking around the squad already.
Yeah, and I was watching Ali and I was thinking, well, what is he actually giving us that Ruben Loftus-Cheek wouldn't, and much, much more? And that, I don't ever think that you should sort of compromise your system to accommodate a single player, but Dele Alli is an absolutely massive talent. I mean, he is a brilliant footballer, isn't he? He's a wonderful footballer. Yeah. But at the moment, this England system doesn't suit him. So I think we are coming to the point where there is a decision that's got to be made where he is always going to be in the squad. But does he start? You know, that's another debate, really. But then
does he start?
Sarri's brought Loftus-Cheek on a couple of times early on this season, and I think if Sarri sees Loftus-Cheek as a big part of Chelsea going forward, I'm just not sure, Chris, because if RLC is getting regular club football and he's playing really well, I don't know what Dele Alli gives us that's sort of extra to that as things stand.
What I'd love us to be able to do is to replace Lingard in this lineup somehow and have a proper midfielder in there and then put Lingard where Ali's playing.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but the problem is that
There's
Lingard is almost sort of hung by his own flexibility,
Yeah.
isn't he? That's the problem. Front two then, Rashford and Kane. I've got thoughts and feelings here, Chris. Right. Here, I'll break it down thus. Really, I don't think Kane works with a partner at the moment. I think he can do longer term, but I think at the moment and at this point of his career, while he's still in his sort of early to mid-20s, Kane is the man you want playing in the middle of a front three and on his own to get into certain areas. I think as he ages and develops, he will be absolutely fine playing with a partner who will play off him, and they will work together absolutely fine. But at this point in the time, I think Kane plays on his own. Rashford at the moment, I think, is in a bit of no man's land. And last night we saw the sort of best and worst of Rashford in that the goal he scored, the link up with Shaw, was absolutely wonderful, great finish. He made himself a real nuisance. He ran into some really intelligent areas. But the flip side of that is he essentially blocks Kane off from going in those same areas. And also Rashford, he looked like a player last night who isn't playing week in, week out for his club, didn't he? And he missed a couple of chances that you look at and you think, well, I'm not saying he necessarily had to score, but he had to do a little bit better than he did, didn't he?
Yeah, it wasn't very polished finishing wise. I thought it was all round a decent performance from him, but he costs you a bit of Kane. And the good and bad side of him were obviously the goal being good. Took that very well, I thought. Run was great. But the positions that he put himself in for the two chances that he should have done better with were excellent positions for him to. The movement is superb. But the finish, particularly with the one on the deck, it's just got to have more conviction behind it.
Yeah, the commentary actually summed it up very, very well. It's exactly what I thought, that he got caught. He got caught between trying to bend it to the far post and then trying to dink it into the near post. And what you do is you do neither.
He did. He sort of dragged it to the middle, didn't he?
Yeah. And I felt watching them last night that you've got two really brilliant strikers in their own way that shouldn't be playing together. And I know as an England fan, we're not sort of allowed the luxury of sitting here and saying we've got options and all this sort of thing. But this is a hill I'm sort of fairly prepared to die on, Chris, in that I don't think Harry Kane is anything like 100% fit, and I don't think he's been fit since the middle of the World Cup. And I don't think you get the best out of Rashford by playing him as a two, and I mean that at club level and at international level. The thing I was really disappointed about last night was Rashford gets that chance with about 15 minutes to go. He gets caught in no man's land. He hits De Gea with the shot. Kane goes following in and just lashes a wild shot. And I don't think either cover themselves in glory. I think,
there was sorry, Dave, there was a chance when Kane went just slightly early with his run and was flagged offside.
Yeah.
And he dragged that terribly.
And you just think it's just not clicking. It's just not quite working. Now, the thing is, I sort of think that I don't think it's major surgery required, but I think you've got to have a three up front, haven't you, Chris, rather than a two?
I think it's starting to look that way. I think what we miss when Raheem Sterling isn't playing is becoming more and more obvious by the game. And I think that the way that you accommodate Rashford and Kane, which I would like to do, both of them, despite criticisms of their end product against Spain, is to just put Sterling with them, isn't it? You have Rashford and Sterling either side of Kane.
Yeah,
Maybe slightly deeper, and then they can pinch in when he drops.
And you sort of think like I know we are both slightly one-eyed because we take our personal time and do a podcast about England, Chris. But you look at any international side and you think of front three of Rashford, Kane, and Sterling. There is, I'd suggest, probably 90% of international sides would snatch your hand off at that.
Yeah, they would. Sterling's the only one that's really firing, I think, out of those three at this very moment. But overall.
Yeah. Substitutes that came on. Henderson comes off, Dyer comes on. Dyer didn't really do anything wrong, didn't really do anything right. He basically just carried on doing what Henderson was doing, didn't he?
Yeah, I find it... during the World Cup, I thought that Henderson as first choice and Dyer as second was clear. As those games progressed, and particularly with Dyer getting a good 25 minutes, well, probably closer to half an hour against Spain, I'm struggling to get anything between them. Stylistically, in terms of standard, in terms of preference, I think both of them are indicators that we need to be stronger in that position.
Luke Shaw gets what can only be described as a sort of real one-off of an injury, wasn't it? He just... I'm not sort of on board with everybody saying, oh, he's that unlucky, because I know he was sort of up about and talking in the changing room after. It's just one of them things, wasn't it, Chris, where he just... It's not the challenge, is it? It's the way he falls. And then Danny Rose comes on, and I thought Danny Rose looked like a player who needed a few more minutes on the pitch going forward.
Yeah, I've seen some more positive reviews of Rose's performance. I thought it was a good distance short of what Shaw was doing.
Yeah, I did too.
Which is fine. It's to be expected. And that's the reason why one is picked as first choice and one isn't. The injury itself was, I think it's worth saying, because on various podcasts over the years, probably both you and certainly me have given football a bit of stick for how it deals with head injuries. The decision to substitute Shaw was probably made very easy by the state he was in when he went down.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it was a decision that was made extremely quickly. And I thought that, in combination with the fact that Sky Sports immediately chose not to show replays, is one of the better handlings of a head injury I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to sort of get to the point where I'm describing it, but it's not the nudge. He obviously comes down and he hits his head on the ground, and you can see the minute he hits there, he's gone.
Yeah.
And it was the right thing to do, because we've got options there. So it's not like, we're scratching around and having to move someone. Then
no,
so,
and he's Man United's player.
Yeah.
So there is that as well.
Yeah, and I'd suggest he's more than likely going to play in Man United's next game, if not the game after that. It wasn't something serious, but yeah. So Rose came on and he looked perfectly competent, but he did look like he was short of minutes. But here's the one where, for somebody who only had 5 minutes on the pitch, we probably need to talk for at least 5 minutes. So Rashford comes off, Welbeck comes on. My feelings about Welbeck are quite simple, really. It's not Danny Welbeck's fault he keeps getting picked for England, okay? And what I mean by that is he's not technically as good as those around him, but every time he puts on an England shirt, he is I would argue better than he is in a club shirt. He came on for 5 minutes and it was chaos, wasn't it, Chris?
That's what he gives you. It's nice to have somebody who's got that little characteristic. Someone who just gives everyone a fright, makes things unpredictable. And in stoppage time, I think it was the 94th minute he came on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
that unpredictability affecting England's players as well, that's allowed at 2-1 down, so I don't think we really knew what he was doing either. It's a real asset if you can harness it properly. And we did, and he scored a lovely goal.
He did, and let's talk about the goal. And you're gonna hate this, Chris, but I'm gonna frame it by talking about VAR.
Fine.
The problem with VAR is that neither of us, I would suggest, are massive fans of it. I think I am slightly more pro than you, Chris, who I would describe as fairly anti, but not...
militant.
Yes, yeah. Well, there you go. You've just summed it up. The issue is that when you've seen it work in the World Cup, and don't get me wrong, we also saw it not work, Chris. I'm not for a minute suggesting it was perfect by any stretch.
I've been watching it in club football since it came into club football, and it has never worked better than at the World Cup.
Yeah. So when you see a situation like that where Welbeck makes a nuisance of himself with a defender and then literally just stands with his arms out, in no way trying to impede a goalkeeper, De Gea makes a complete, mess of it. I mean, we could have a podcast alone about De Gea's club form and country form, but we are an England-focused podcast. Makes a complete mess of it, and drops it like that. There was absolutely no reason for that not to be a goal, was there? And that's not Stiles Council spectacles, is it? I could not see any reason why that wasn't a goal.
It might be Stiles Council spectacles. But I share them, so I can't really judge it. I can't see anything wrong with that, and I'm growing increasingly frustrated with that kind of decision being made as the easy decision. I've seen it from my club in the last couple of weeks as well.
He's touched a goalkeeper, so it must be a foul.
Yeah, it must be, without actually thinking about it. And actually, two of my problems with VAR, as you brought it up, I wasn't going to bring it up. Firstly, if we're applying the clear and obvious error criteria to it, I don't think it qualifies.
No,
because it's questionable. We're not. I think we both have the same opinion about it, but we're not completely certain it was absolutely clear that it wasn't a foul. And secondly, I think you look at the collision with the defender and the slight, we'll call it a hip shimmy, in the vicinity of the goalkeeper. And I don't think every referee in the world would not see those as fouls.
No.
I think there is an argument that I would strongly disagree with, that there is a foul in there. And I think it's nonsense. And it frustrates the hell out of me that those two things could either of them be seen as a foul. But they are, week in, week out, both of them given as fouls. So I'm kind of fuming. But this is the game we've created for ourselves.
Yeah, my personal take on it is that I don't see any reason why that isn't a foul. In terms of how we watch football. Because the simple fact is, if a keeper misjudges a challenge like that, the referee will always rule on the side of the keeper, because we've created this weird situation in football where a keeper can get away with those mistakes for some reason. Now, I'm not saying I agree with it, but that is football currently.
Yeah, that's where we are. Actually, I happen to think that Welbeck was more innocent than most in that situation, because he really did nothing.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I would completely agree. For me, that is absolutely 100% a goal. But again, I'm a bit like you, Chris, in that I'm in this weird position where I look at it and also know exactly why it's being ruled out. And that's because somebody's had the audacity to stand there when a keeper needs to get the ball. Keeper is this weird position in football. It's the only specialist position in football. And I don't know why we're still sticking to this belief that a keeper can make a mistake like that and for some reason it must be the attacker's fault. I don't get that at all. But it should have been a goal, but I understand why it wasn't, But at the same token, that isn't me sort of saying, well, I'm all right with it. I'm not. It should have been a goal.
So the bigger point is you look at it and you think, I don't want that to be a foul.
No. And to bring it back to the dreaded VAR again, you sort of think, well, if that's gone to VAR, you would hope that somebody somewhere is looking at that and going, well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, wouldn't you?
I'd hope it. My suspicion is actually that the replay would reinforce the decision.
Yeah, because they'd see the keeper coming over the top, and they would place some sort of blame on a striker allegedly backing in when all he was doing was just standing there.
Yeah, and of course the key thing that so many of us, including me, actually forget about VAR is the guy who makes the final decision is the referee.
Yeah, yeah.
Who of course made the original decision.
Yeah. I mean, without sort of saying things I've already said, again, it's one of those things where it should absolutely be a goal. We all know it should be a goal, but we all know exactly why it's been ruled out as well.
Yep.
So it lives in that strange sort of grey area.
It does, and it's frustrating. And then just to bring it back to the very beginning of the podcast, it's frustrating because it felt like a competitive game, which I was a bit surprised by, atmosphere-wise and tickets-wise and competition-wise.
I think England's first sort of 20-25 minutes. Well, no, actually, that's probably putting too brave a face on it. I think England, until they conceded that first goal, were playing really, really well and doing lots of very good things. But then the last 20 minutes of that game, England were very much on top, and they grew into it, and they finished much the better side. Is that enough to turn around and say, well, we deserved a draw? Probably not, because Spain are an excellent side, and there was large portions of that game where they were just keeping us at arm's length and just knocking the ball out for knocking the ball around for fun.
Yeah. And the key time they did that actually was the very beginning of stoppage time at the end of the game.
Yeah.
And they finally took the sting out of our tail a little bit.
Yeah.
And had 5 minutes of possession.
But it was a classic case of, you look at this game and you think, well, regardless of World Cup performance, Spain are arguably a top 3 side in the world. So you think, well, we lost 2-1 to them when we're all sort of, I would hope anyway, anybody listening to this this podcast is sort of willing to say that this is a journey we're on, and this is something we're sort of committed to longer term rather than being there right now. And you almost have to be all right with losing this game, don't you, Chris?
You're going to make life very difficult for yourself if you're not.
Yeah.
Because we're not there yet.
I think you can make, going forward, talking about the Nations League, I think when we play Croatia, I think you have to be more hopeful of getting something from that game, don't you? Realistically, take the World Cup completely out of it. I think pound for pound we can stand up and go toe to toe with Croatia, but we're not as good as Spain. So
no, exactly.
We haven't sort of learned anything that we didn't know before, and we're not suddenly sitting here saying, well, that was a massive shock either. So all in all, it's a defeat, but it's a defeat we can make caveats for, and I think we can both sit here with a semblance of balance and say, well, fair enough, Chris.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a little annoyed that we didn't get the draw because of the manner of the equaliser that I think should have been, but you know they were better than us for, I reckon, a good hour of that game.
I mean, Thiago, just to pick out a player individually. Thiago showed us exactly what we're missing, and then you factor in the fact that he's played in front of Busquets, and there's Saul Rodriguez on the pitch. That is everything England haven't got, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think I don't think Isco had his best game, but we're certainly missing one of him as well. And actually, I thought for a player that I've never really given much time to and properly observed, I thought Rodrigo caused us a surprising amount of problems as well.
Yeah, but I think this is probably a wildly awful thing to say, but it's that classic Man City thing, Chris, to be perfectly honest with you. I think if you've got the players, the calibre loading the gun for you effectively, you suddenly look a hell of a lot better than you actually are. And I don't think Rodrigo is a great player by any stretch.
No.
The players
I think
he had
was able to get in behind us, and
yeah,
I'm willing to give him some credit for some of the stuff he did on the ball.
Yeah.
And I think
the difference is Rashford and Kane make those runs, but we haven't got the players of the quality who can pick them out and who can work the move to get them into those positions. Whereas Rodrigo makes those runs knowing that he's being fed by players of a far higher calibre. So, yeah, I all in all, it's a loss, but I was fairly happy, Chris. You know, we should have had the draw, so it's not like we're sort of beating ourselves up about that. But I think we can be fairly hopeful going forward, and we should have another Stiles Council pod very soon for you after the next friendly, shouldn't we, Chris?
We should.
So we'll draw it a close there, and we will speak to you very, very soon, because in these international breaks we like to do it on a game by game basis. So, all things being equal, we should speak to you before the end of the week. So we shall see you soon. Say goodbye, Chris.
Goodbye.
And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.